guys, Victoria Jones Griffith here, and I am back. This is lesson number 4, the vulnerability of my 5 V's in living a victorious life. All 5 V's you can find at the end of my book that's up on Amazon. It's called Victorious, and ebook, paperback, whichever you prefer. And the 5 V's are actually at the end of the book. But if you haven't gotten the book, that's okay. I outline the 5 V's in my prior videos that I started a couple of weeks ago. So I have an intro video, and then I have the first V, lesson number 1, 2, 3, and this is lesson number 4, the vulnerability. But I wanted to start out by reviewing the 5 V's in case you're new to these videos, and then you can go back and watch the other ones. So what are the 5 V's? These are the tools that I used in my journey to heal myself over a period of 10 years of living as a victim of sexual abuse and assault that started back when I was 19 years old, and didn't get help for it, didn't talk to anybody, and really it took me about 10 years, I call it a 20-year journey, over 20 years, because it took me about 10 years to get to the root of my problem and then start my healing journey. So that's what my story is about. And then the 5 V's at the end are how you can live a victorious life and not have to spend 10 years going through what I went through, which whatever you have gone through in your life, it doesn't have to be sexual assault or abuse. It can just be a event that has caused you to stay stuck in that victim mentality, which I talk about in the first V, about that inner critic that we just can't turn off and that keeps us stuck in making us feel like we're not good enough, we're not worthy, and that we're damaged goods. So we have to get out of that victimhood state. So that is actually lesson number 1 in living a victorious life. And then the second V is the validation, and that is all the things that we look for outside of ourselves for external validation when we need to be looking inward and loving ourselves. And I give you some tips on the things I used that helped me love myself. The tools, the journaling, and the mirror work, all of that's included in lesson number 2 and in my book. And then the third V is the voice, which I talk about using our voice, stepping into our power. That's important, but also quieting our voice and going within so that we can find our true authentic self. So that was lesson number 3. Lesson number 4 is what we're talking about on this video, vulnerability. And we'll circle back to that here in a second. And then lesson number 5 is the victory. Yay! That is living a victorious life. And I'll talk about that in the next video, the things that I did to stay in that, or to currently stay in that sweet spot daily and finding joy every single day in our lives. So that's the 5 V's, living a victorious life. Let's go back to lesson number 4, which we're on the vulnerability. And when I say the word vulnerability, most people cringe or gasp or just shut down. That is a word that we're pretty uncomfortable with. We are uncomfortable with being vulnerable. So we have to start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And finding the right amount of vulnerability is so important. Brene Brown is the one that introduced me to the even idea of vulnerability being important in every aspect of our lives. And I have always been almost too vulnerable. And if you read my book, you'll understand where that came from in my life. And typically a traumatic event will set that off. So there is a balance between being too vulnerable and not being vulnerable enough. So you do need vulnerability. So it's not, if you're too vulnerable, it's not that you should not be vulnerable and that you've got to get into this, hard casing, or I call it your mask or your armor that you wear. No, we have to find the right balance to live a victorious life and be joyful and live with passion and purpose, and are able to love ourselves and experience love. So let's talk about that a little bit. So when we talk about balancing our vulnerability, we talk about balancing our masculine and our feminine sides, our divine masculine and our divine feminine. And I know that seems kind of woo-woo yogi-esque, but it really is important to know that we have both inside of us, both men and women. It's a genderless type of energy that we both have, divine masculine and divine feminine. We have to find the balance in between. If you read my book, you will see how I started in my divine feminine as I was growing up, and then took a wild turn into my divine, living solely out of my divine masculine. And neither one is where I needed to be the healthiest version and the best version of myself. Had to find that balance between. So if you haven't read my book, that it's very apparent in my story, and I'll touch on that when I talk about each of the aspects of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. So again, back to the divine feminine, divine masculine, that is balancing the head, divine masculine, with the heart, divine feminine. So let's go ahead and talk about divine feminine aspects. So your divine feminine, coming from the heart, is the lover, the creative, the intuitive, the nurturer. If you're already that's resonating with you, it is the divine feminine is more fluid. And when the divine feminine is out of balance, and again, we're trying to get to balance with it, when the divine feminine is out of balance, then that can leave us open to, like what I experienced, being vulnerable to predators or sexual assault, abusive relationships, because you're caught in that victim role, in that pleaser role. A lot of people that operate solely out of their divine feminine are pleasers, and they have lost sight of themselves because they're giving everything away. They haven't established boundaries. So when you're in balance with your divine feminine, you have established boundaries, and you can still be that creative type. You can still be that nurturer and take care of people, but you have those boundaries in place, and you can experience love. That is why the divine feminine is so important, because if you don't allow yourself to become vulnerable in certain situations and allowing love into your life, then you're staying shut off. So again, so important that you find that balance. If you've read my book, where I really lived fully in my divine masculine was after repeated assaults that happened in my life, physical assaults, sexual assaults that happened in my life. And I just took on, year after year, after each hurt, I took on more weight, pushed my divine feminine away, which was a protective method. So I became more masculine, more aggressive. I tried to use this as like a false sense of power in order to control situations, so that I wouldn't feel like someone was going to hurt me again. So I just put on this masculine persona to push men away. And that is the masculine. But let's talk about some aspects of the divine masculine, and that's more of the warrior, the control, kind of almost control freak, the inner critic in your mind that has to have all the details, that has to question everything. It's from the head versus the heart. And the doer, it's more action oriented. Actually, also is part of the ego, and which the ego is important that we have that, but we can't live fully out of our ego and for the hustle and the work and all of that. And that is the divine masculine. When you're out of balance with your divine masculine, then you are a little more aggressive, like I talked about in my story. More aggressive, seeking power, having to have control, more rigid, which we know is not attractive to stay inflexible, to be so rigid. That's the divine masculine when it's out of balance. And also when it comes to getting a little personal here with sexuality, during the time in my life when after I'd experienced, several abusive relationships and in assaults on my divine feminine and my sexuality, then I was the one that was going out and trying to take control and being the aggressive one physically. And would be, if you see women that have done this or hear women that talk about this, because I've lived it, I have such empathy on that, are like, I can go out and have sex with, you know, several men and I don't feel anything. I can be a guy, I can be a dude, I can act like a dude, and I have no feelings for them. And that is a woman that is extremely shut off from their divine feminine, and they're hurting and they're using this to take control. I know from my personal experience, I would go out and feel like, okay, if I went home with a man and it was my choice and I could have sex like a man, then I was in control and no man is going to take advantage of me. I kept that pattern up to protect myself until I saw my spiritual director, who helped me figure out why and gave me great clarity as to why I was using that form of, it was like a coping mechanism that I was using in order to establish some sort of control and power. And that was not healthy. So that is operating out of the divine masculine that can actually be working against us, because you have to balance that divine feminine in. You can't shut it off completely. Now, when you're in balance with your divine masculine, you have the right amount of strength. You are able to step into your power, able to use your voice, and you can use your strength and your warrior and your action for good. And boundaries. You can establish boundaries so that you don't feel like you have to be in that power struggle, but yet you can let people in at the same time. Because, by the way, if you go back to that divine feminine, in that intuition will tell you who you should be able to let in and who you need to keep at a distance. So again, it is a dance. I like to think of it as a dance between the masculine and the feminine at all times. So let's talk about workouts, since that's my specialty, that help balance the divine masculine and feminine. So starting out with the divine feminine, if you feel like you need to get in touch with your divine feminine and you're stuck in that masculine role, you gotta have control, very rigid, you need to loosen up a little bit, I recommend dance. There's no better way to address that divine feminine and fluidity and just letting go, because if you've ever gone to a dance class, you just have to let go. That inner critic definitely goes away when you start to dance. So dance is a great one. Yoga, restorative yoga, not the competitive, I've got to work out type yoga, go hard. That will help you open up if dance is not your thing, a little more fluid. Allows you to be open. We talk about opening up the heart in yoga a lot. That heart meditation that I did on the last video, if you haven't watched it, in lesson number 3, watch that one. That if you don't feel like moving, you can do a meditation that comes from the heart and address that divine feminine. That's a great one, even to do in the middle of the day. That was a 1-minute meditation. And then any kind of water activity will help you address that divine feminine, more fluidity. And anytime you get in the water, you know that you are able to you have to let go and flow. I love to talk about that feeling of getting into the flow. So to balance that out, the workouts that help address the divine masculine are one of my favorites, boxing. You get a lot of strength, a lot of power, and you feel very empowered through that movement, kind of hitting something. It's like therapy on a punching bag. So boxing is great. Also weightlifting is another way that you can balance that divine feminine. If you're one of those cardio queens that, all they want to do is cardio dance, or all you want to do is cardio, you need to bring some strength training in. That'll help you to balance that divine masculine, also your hormones, which I'll talk about here in a second. So of course it's good to be balanced. Also, what more divine masculine movement is like kettlebells, powerlifting, and competitive sports. Like maybe you're one that's in their divine feminine and you sign up for a race that you get a little more competitive. So that's definitely addressing more of the divine masculine. So again, you need both. It's good to do both type of workouts. And why, even for longevity with your hormones, in your autonomic nervous system, you have your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous systems. So we want to keep those balanced as well. So if you're a cardio queen, you're running out of your sympathetic nervous system that's more catabolic. Cardio is good, but not too much, because that will send your cortisol levels up, and that's when we start carrying more body fat. So you don't want to drain yourself, because we have enough stress in our lives anyway. So that's when you bring the parasympathetic movement in, workouts in, and the parasympathetic is more of the anabolic, more strength training, a little bit slower. For those that gotta be up here, you gotta slow it down a little bit in order to putting on a little muscle that'll help burn more fat, is a way to address that parasympathetic side and balance your systems in your body. So divine masculine, divine feminine, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, it all works together. And as far as your hormones are concerned, you've got your male hormones, you've got your testosterone. Lifting, a little bit of weight will help keep your testosterone levels up. And ladies, that's important. It's important for men, we know, but it's also important for women. And growth hormone up naturally, which is so great that you can do it naturally through just adding a little bit of weight to your workouts and finding the balance there with our female and male hormones. So that was a lot of information, and that was lesson number 4 on vulnerability. Next video, we'll be talking about lesson number 5, the victory. It's my favorite. So tune in for that, or keep up with this playlist, because they're all together and you can watch all the videos and make sure you get all the 5 V's. If you haven't gotten my book, I have it all the 5 V's at the end, but my journey explains why the 5 V's kind of came about and why they're important to me and hopefully important to you. So until next time, be victorious.